Basically, Civic Reset is kind of like it operates as a sort of think tank, nonprofit, and it's an organization that me and Angelo started last spring, and it's essentially meant to combat the housing crisis, and the goal is to advocate for zoning reform and affordable housing policies that's going to bring down the overall rent and help fight the housing crisis.
So I guess talking about supply and demand, how does rent stabilizing impact local marketplaces? And how does that differ from citywide, statewide, and even countrywide marketplaces?
Oh, that's interesting because it's interesting you say that because in the context of New York City, zoning specifically limits a bunch of things like the density of particular projects, or it restricts types of projects. It restricts the number of units that a developer can supply. So basically, it's putting upward pressure on rent, and it's also putting upward pressure on sales prices. So you make a good point. It is, while we talked about in class, like it's kind of meant as a kind of a support, it is actually, playing havoc with the natural tendencies of supply and demand, right? There is, to your point, from a national level, there is empirical evidence that indicates that more restrictive local zoning and land use regimes reduce the elasticity of housing supply and thereby raising housing prices. But specifically in the context of New York City, that's what I'm getting at. It restricts not just that, but the number of units that a builder can create and supply, and therefore placing this upward pressure on rents and sale prices. Yeah.
So I think on the point of number of units, right? Majority of new constructions over a certain amount of units have to have rent stabilization. Uh, I believe 20 units per 100. I could be wrong on that. Do you think that having a specific quota of rent stabilization could impact developers' willingness to pursue projects or even raise the prices of their other units? That's why they have to market them all as luxury, perhaps.
I think yes on both counts. I think yes on both counts. So they're gonna it's gonna limit the numbers they can, and the ones that they do, they're obviously gonna offset the price there, offset any kind of maybe overhead or profit margin into that one, and they might spread that out absolutely to some of their other developments and units. Totally agree with that.
Okay. So then if you consider rent control to be justified, does it negatively impact economic output for local stores, or as areas grow more and more either rent controlled or upzoned, meaning that they have more luxury units? Do they positively or negatively impact small businesses in either case?
Yeah, I think zoning plays kind of a spatial dimension on the economics of housing and the surrounding folks around it, right? If it produ if zoning prohibits multifamily housing or limits density, and reduces, as we agreed, supply of lower cost units, it also contributes to segregation, right, by housing cost and by income, and thus the economic development of the surrounding area. Absolutely. Um, One of the companies I used to consult with is called Fiserv, right? They're a fintech company, and they were based, I think, originally out of New Jersey. They have spots everywhere, but a few years ago, the CEO just lived in Manhattan and wanted to work in Manhattan. And as a result, after much negotiation with New York City, they got a subsidy to move to Broadway, right, in downtown. Now, while COVID was kind of an aberration and work from home is obviously an aberration to what we're talking about, it kind of underscores the point that when people do not work in an office, or not enough people work in an area, right, the surrounding economics go south. So in my example, while not directly related, if you're working from home and not attending your office in Broadway, all the delis and restaurants and candy stores and food trucks in the surrounding area suffer, right?
I think a great example of that would be Atlanta, Georgia, right? I mean, it's one of the biggest downtowns in America, save for LA and Phoenix, I believe. So many people living in such a large area that there's no real city center that has a business center or an office center where people could go to congregate and spend money on goods and services. So I definitely agree with you there.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting you make that point, Angela, because I mean, obviously LA has a downtown, but LA, the city proper, is spread out over I don't know how many square miles, more than the 24 square miles of Manhattan Island, right? And
Yeah.
so you're seeing, and even the city of Chicago, it's more of a city of neighborhoods, right? And you could argue that each section of Chicago has its own dynamic and its own economics. But yeah, it's a great example. Then it's so spread out that there is no one downtown, so to speak, right? And that makes total sense what you're saying.
Yeah, I think with LA specifically, it's also a really good example because I remember when I was in LA, there was essentially well, first of all, there's no real infrastructure for public transport.
Right.
So I mean, so you're stuck driving everywhere. And you're sitting in traffic, like you'll sit 30, 40 minutes to go a mile or two if you're in the center or anywhere. And then it's miles. So you can go from one end to the other, take 6, 7 miles, and it's just extremely inefficient and it's not a good system. But I also had a question regarding to what you were saying when you were talking about the segregation aspect of things and how certain individuals might be moved out of their communities by zoning laws. I guess my question to you is, what argument would you make to the people that say that they want to preserve the character of their neighborhood so that they don't want to touch the zoning laws to allow more people to come in and to bring down the rents eventually?
That was a very leading question because your final statement was dot 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 to bring down the rents eventually. Can you
Yeah.
clarify the question a little bit?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess what I'm asking is that there'll be zoning proposals to have more higher density units and things of that nature with proper infrastructure support in order to eventually, ideally, decrease the rent by allowing more units to be built and having more of them be affordable. But the argument that a lot of people in the neighborhoods will make against that is saying that it's going to mess up the character of the neighborhood and they want to keep their neighborhoods the same as it is now. And changing the density is going to affect that, I guess.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
yeah.
I get what you're saying. Are you referring to the City of Yes for Housing initiative from I think earlier or about December of 24? Is
Yeah,
that
not
you?
not directly, but I have heard that response to that proposal a lot, like on social media and things of that nature.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess what you're saying, and I'm referencing the City of Yes,
Yeah.
this kind of um, implicitly acknowledges the linkage between supply constraints because of these restrictive zonings and the affordability crisis by increasing the supply capacity, right?
Hmm.
And ultimately to moderate rent and price growth, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, I think is what you're saying. And
Yeah.
Angelo is thinking, I know he's thinking, well, that shifts the supply curve to the right. Um, So what do I say to those folks, Free, that says, well, I understand that you're getting there, but that could take time. And plus, I don't want to lose the character
Yeah.
of my town. And that's a tough argument to make, right?
Hmm.
Because I don't know, I'm born and raised in New York, and I've
Yeah.
seen, I assume you guys are born and raised in and around New York as well. And so, on one hand, at an individual town for town level, um, I think it's terrible, right?
Yeah.
But having grown up here, um, and watched New York City reinvent itself over decades is an amazing thing from a macro global level, right? The dark underbelly is that towns get wiped out, right?
Hmm.
Cultures
Yeah.
get diminished, right? And one could argue that is the American experience,
Uh-huh.
right? Anybody can come to this country and become American, right?
Hmm.
Because it's a melting pot. You can't move to France and become a French person, right?
Right.
You will always be somebody
An
not from France,
American. Yeah.
right? Anybody. So part of that magic means destruction,
Mm.
right? And Angela and I have talked about our roots as Italians, right? And
Yeah.
when my parents moved here in the 50s, right? And in my by the time they had me, had tons of friends, and I grew up in what was a very insular culture.
Hmm.
Um, and by the time I went to high school, I was like, wow, there are Americans out here, like I was, and then as I grew up and went to high school and college, I realized I became American in a sense,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And so that is part of New York City. I think that is part of American culture. And I think, what do I say to those people? Well, this is how America grows, right? And
Right.
that being said, there are more people and cultures in Queens than there are, like, I think, cultures in the world, or was some ridiculous, like I was visiting my friend and I were going to visit his daughter who lives in Astoria.
Hmm. Angela.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah. And by the time we parked the car, I forget where exactly, it was south of the LIE. We were in Little Egypt, right? And by the time we got to her apartment, it was closer to the bridge. We were in a mostly Greek area, right? And so in a matter of 1 square mile, I saw 10 cultures, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think while New York City um, uh, evolves and gobbles these things up, it also pays a certain homage to it, right? There is a Little Egypt, there was a Little Italy, there is
Hmm.
Chinatown, right? There is Koreatown and Midtown, right? And so I think it's a weird dichotomy that you will lose it, but it also remains in some form.
And to what you were talking about constant destruction in America and how neighborhoods are always
Yeah,
changing, I
yeah,
actually think a great example is Astoria. I mean, I went there with
yeah,
Fareed a couple weeks ago, and we
Yeah.
went to LIC, we went to Hunters Point, and we even went up by Ditmars and Steinway, around where I'm at. And we saw new constructions coming up, massive towers, 20 stories tall.
yeah.
And I mean, I talked to my parents 20 years ago. There was nothing. It was car garages, auto shops, and that's about it. At warehouses, forget it. And actually, a good example of this happened on my block. This old house, single family, got torn down, and now I think it's either 6 or 8 apartments, and they're going for premium prices. You have 3K for studios or 5K for 2 bedrooms, and it's completely reshaping the area. Everything's changing. New businesses are coming in, a lot of new people. So what I wanted to ask was this sort of butterfly effect, people moving from Manhattan because they cannot afford rents there, and increasing rents in other smaller neighborhoods. Is there a way to combat that? Does it ever end, or do people just continue to get pushed out, pushed out, pushed out as more people move out from the city center?
Yeah, I mean, that's an existential question, right? Do we want it to end? Um, do we want Rome to cease being Rome? Right? Do we want New York City to not be the center of the universe? Obviously, as New Yorkers, we're biased, right? New York City is
Right.
the
Yeah.
center of the universe. Do we want that? I don't know. As the son of an immigrant, I'm a little sad that I see some of the things I used to see gone, right? But as an American in New York City, I'm proud that we are still Rome.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And so I don't know. Listen, when I started working at Citigroup many years ago, the mothership was the tower in Long Island City.
I see that
You,
tower from my house actually from my window
yeah,
every
Yeah.
day. Yeah,
right. The Altice Tower now, right?
right.
10-ish years ago, we moved to Greenwich Street in Manhattan, right? But when I used to go to meetings there, we would park at the Court Square parking lot behind the courts, right? And we'd go to the building. And sometimes we'd walk around, and like you said, Angelo, it's like garages, you know, like mom and pop mechanic shops, an occasional bodega or bakery. Now there are a million buildings,
Yeah.
state of the art LEED buildings, right? Top
Yeah.
of the line,
Craft
Yeah.
breweries everywhere,
craft
sushi
breweries
Yeah, crab
everywhere,
places.
brew.
right?
Yeah, we actually went to a sushi place around that area and we were amazed because the inside it was just so large. Like all the even the tables and the chairs, they're just so big and we're like they have so much space here. It was interesting. But yeah, there's a lot of different things to do
Yeah.
around
And
that area.
so I mourn the loss of the small town places, but I celebrate the growth of Rome. And there are still places that celebrate uh, uh, nationalities and regionalities, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you can argue even with all the changes, there is still, you know, um, a little Italy, a little Egypt, right? You could still argue they
Yeah.
exist, right? Um, so I'm of two minds, as much as as an individual, I mourn some of those places.
Right.
As a New Yorker, I celebrate. I'm amazed that this city reinvents itself every decade or 15 years. It's a brand new city. And like, what city can do that?
No, I think it's so dynamic. It's just so dynamic.
And yeah, I mean, so it's incredible. Like, if I
Yeah.
don't go to the city for a few weeks and I go there, I'm like, whoa, it's
Yeah.
that dynamic, right?
Yeah.
Even when I was teaching in Fordham regularly, I would still walk around and notice there's always something growing and
Mhm.
happening, right? And so what does that mean as it relates to our meeting today? I think your efforts matter because there is no binary solution here. It is the constant battle of pushing back and pushing back and pushing back, right? You guys and your initiative as it grows and you push back and policymakers listen to you, will push back and maybe it'll push back developers and they'll push back. The act of growth is the act of destruction, right? And I
Yeah.
think it is the two, it's like people like you and this initiative that will always be the yin and yang of and the back and forth of this growth.
Yeah. I guess um with that last part, what we're trying to essentially bridge the gap of is how we can connect the public interest to private developers' interest and kind of bridge that and try to plan or think different policies or zoning reforms that are essentially going to allow the developers to still have incentive to build the new buildings and make their money, but then also keep it slightly more reasonable for the public and make a change in a positive way. I don't want everyone to look back and think, wow, I really love being a New Yorker, but I just simply can't afford to live in any of the parts, any of the boroughs anymore eventually in 10, 20 years. Um, so I guess with that being said, and with your economic background, are there any specific policies or reforms or just general concepts that you would like to see to help connect those two things and bridge that gap?
Yeah, I think once you connect economic interest, widespread economic interest
Mhm.
to profitability, then you will link the well-being of the everyman to developers. Let me rephrase it in a different way. Once you point out to developers that they can make money and still satisfy the everyman's
Right.
desires, then that's where you'll find success. Let me give you an example outside of our context, right? So, for decades and decades and decades, electric vehicles were non-starters. In
Mhm.
the 80s, General Motors had an electric vehicle. Did you hear about that car called the GM? I think it was called the Volt. Did you ever hear of that
No, I
car?
haven't. No, I
Yeah,
haven't.
look it up. GM electric car from the 80s. Nobody heard about it. It died on the vine. Now, maybe after government intervention, because the government is, whether you are pro or against them noodling in the private sector, they act as incubators, right? And so after all this time, when EV makers realize it's profitable to provide electric vehicles,
Yep.
possibly from some subsidized growth, right? Then we can reduce carbon footprint and help the environment by making money on EVs. So once you figure out a point in time or a method by which you can connect free market capitalism and profitability to the greater good, you're just going to keep butting your heads. And that's the kind of thing. Once you find that sweet spot, right? And sometimes that sweet spot is promulgated by the incubator that is government intervention.
Yep.
I think there's something to be said for just time as a whole, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I'll use Long Island City as an example again. Fareed and I visited, what, 2 weeks ago, and walking down the streets, there were very few businesses in select areas, especially by the train station, Queensboro Plaza. But you walk further by Hunters Point, and there are more local shops, there are supermarkets, there are restaurants. So I think giving these buildings more time to develop a sort of place within the community to develop their own retail shops and get their units filled will eventually allow for lower prices and more economic activity in the area.
Yeah, totally on point there. Uh, and maybe, my last statement was pie in the sky, but I can tell you I witnessed some of it in action. I used to have an office in Sunset Park. I think it was on Fifth Avenue back in about 10 or 12 years ago. And between that and the high street, there was nothing. It was like our building, some restaurants around our building, and then like nothingness along Fifth Avenue, right? And not too far from Prospect Park. And then I noticed over couple of years, is when there became an anchor building down the road, restaurants and homes started to fill in between my building and the anchor building,
Mm,
right? So maybe if developers are coaxed into building whatever you want to call it, maybe anchor buildings or development that anchors things into place, everything grows around it.
right. Yeah, that does make sense. It actually t kind of ties back to the EV thing that you were talking about, which is actually super insightful. I've never even thought about it that way. Because I mean, even you tell me like 10 years ago that electric cars are gonna be the future, I'd be like, yeah, yeah, right. Like, get out of here. I mean, there's no way. But now, I mean, and especially in some other like European cities and whatnot, it's a requirement. I mean, when I was in Copenhagen over the summer, it's like Uber doesn't exist there. You can only use Bolt, which is like for electric cars. And I found that really fascinating because there was so much pushback against it, and now it's just the norm. And like you said, the car developers now are actually making significant profit margins off it too, because they figure out how to make it cheaper and cheaper and how to increase profits while also having a positive, sustainable impact on the environment and on people.
Right. You can't be as high-minded to say, I don't know if you could see the GM
Yeah.
EV1
I
story.
can,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. You can't be so high-minded to say we need to lower our carbon footprint driving EV without having the private sector on board,
right,
honestly. This was an utter failure,
yeah. It's
right?
not even a bad looking car
It's not,
either.
well, yeah, at the time it was odd to see on the road, but you're
Yeah,
looking at it through today's eyes and it looks, oh, that's pretty cool looking, right?
yeah,
But the average Joe wasn't gonna, buy
yeah,
this, you know?
yeah. Maybe a
Uh,
real novelty item.
yeah, right. And so but it needed its time.
Yeah,
And, maybe uh through the incubator of government intervention with credits and stuff like that. Um, I mean, GM did that on their own dime and failed, right?
yeah,
And so, yeah. I think everything ha is comes of its time. I will tell you right now, I think that we are in a political environment where anything that's not accepted by the average dude is not going to be listened to, right? I think
Mhm.
we're in an age of bullyism, and hopefully that leaves us soon,
Yeah.
right? If you understand what I'm getting at, I think we're in
Yeah.
a, and so even if we do have some high-minded ideas, I don't think they'll be listened to because right now that's not the environment we live in. But
Right.
time, I think Angelo and Freed, you both mentioned that time in itself is part of the process.
I know we only have 2 minutes left, but I wanted to say thank you very much for this interview.
Yeah.
Very insightful. And I appreciate you taking time for it. I really do.
That was
Um,
my pleasure. I had a good time.